Okay, so I'm starting on page 442 in the book. And the Barclay titles this section, The King's Messenger and the King's Sufferings. So if somebody could read Matthew chapter 10, verses 24 and 25.
I'll read.
Okay.
The scholar is not above his teacher, nor is the slave above his master. It is enough for the scholar that he should be as his teacher, and the servant that he should be as his master. If they have called the master of the house Beelzebul, how much more shall they so call the members of his household?
Okay, this is a warning from Jesus that, oh, here they come.
Here they come.
This is a warning from Jesus that his disciples should expect to receive the same treatment that he did. And I read one of my other sources. Kathy and Susan both have this, and he used the word eschatological half a dozen times on this passage. So, you know, you look at this through the eyes of the end times. And Barclay talks about how when this was written, the temple had already been destroyed. And I thought it was very graphic that this destruction was so complete that a plow was drawn across the devastation.
And I guess we can assume the only thing left was the Western Wall, which is the current Wailing Wall.
Yeah. And there are two things in this saying of Jesus. Number one, there's a warning that I already talked about that some. There's a warning that as Christ has to carry a cross, so do the individual Christians have to carry a cross. The word itself is used for the members of your household, and specifically in the Greek, it's basically a member of the government and his staff. So it's like the disciples are his staff. Everybody's going to have to go through the same thing. And then the second thing, there's also a statement of privilege, that it is a privilege for us to have to suffer the way Jesus suffered. And I don't know that we ever think about that. To have to sacrifice for the faith is to share the sacrifice of Christ. When Christianity is hard, we can say to ourselves, not only we are treading where the saints have trod, we can also say we are treading where the feet of Christ have trod.
Well, but he gives some good examples of groups that become like brothers that made it understandable to me. And then I thought of other groups like SEAL Team 6 or the Green Berets, or, you know, there are groups that train together so much so that they are like a band of brothers. And the disciples were as well.
Which reminds me, this is a little bit of an aside, but Stuart had asked me a question, you know, what do we know about the disciples? And she was curious about that. And so I've been doing some research, and I'm thinking that maybe when we finish Matthew, our next topic might be looking at the disciples. Just to throw out that idea for your consideration.
Didn't Brenda Kidd teach, there's multiple books that have been written about what we know about the disciples and then other things filled in. If I'm not mistaken, Brenda Kidd either had the book, taught the book, the 12 disciples and what we know about them.
Okay, I'll check with her and see what she's got.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay, well, like I said, we are months away from that. When Christianity costs something, we are closer than we ever were to the fellowship of Jesus Christ. And if we know the fellowship of his sufferings, we shall also know the power of his resurrection. So any comments on that?
Well, does it cost us anything today?
Yeah.
I don't feel like it does.
No.
And I'm not saying I want to suffer either.
Right, agreed.
Right.
It might cost us something if I think it might cost us something to sometimes challenge the traditional some traditional thoughts in a lot of Christian churches.
True. Yeah. Yeah.
Churches break up because of their different thoughts about
Yeah.
who to include and who to exclude.
You know, the thought that kind of comes to mind for me is too, that when people, whether it be a couple or a small group or a church or a school faculty, you know, when there is a difficult issue or a difficult time, they pull together and work together through the issue, they tend to come out stronger on the other side. You know, when, so that when you go through that process of suffering, that time of suffering, and you work together on it, you tend to come out stronger. You know, I think about the different challenging times professionally for me and the coworkers that we work together on it, and how near and dear those people still are for me. So food for thought.
Yeah.
Yeah, that this.
It either splits you apart or makes you stronger.
Right. You know, the marriages that overcome an affair, you know, and that kind of thing. That there's one couple in particular that I know that overcame a very public situation and are much stronger now than ever.
Yeah.
So, and they'd already been through a lot. So anyhow, there's that growing together, you know, as a group or a church, whatever. The churches that split apart are the ones that say, hey, no, we're not going to work on this anymore. You know, I want it my way. And
yeah.
It amazes me how different groups find support for what they believe in the Bible and their direct opposite thoughts.
Well, I mean, it's like you can, if you tack, you know, for Jesus onto anything, you can say club a baby seal for Christ.
Right.
Huh.
It doesn't mean that what you're tacking that onto is an acceptable behavior.
Wow.
Right.
Oh, it means you're manipulating for your own benefit.
Yeah. I used to read a lot of John Shelby Spong, who was an Episcopal bishop. Kathy and I went and heard him preach once. I've heard him preach more than once. And he wrote a book, and the title of it was Why Christianity Must Change or Die. And in that book, he talks about how in the past, people have used the Bible to support slavery, to support keeping women quiet and in the kitchen, you know, and there are Bible verses for all of this.
There's Bible verses for just about anything.
Yeah. And he said, you know, if Christianity doesn't change what they're doing, it will die. And this book was probably written 20 years ago. And I think today it probably is even more important.
Yeah.
I think church going and religiosity ebbs and flows like everything else in society. After 9/11, everybody's back in church. You know, after certain things, people feel a draw to go back to church, and then it's like they become more self-serving, self-sufficient, and they wander away from the church, and then something will happen and back they come.
Yeah.
Like everybody at Christmas and Easter, people show up that you don't see the rest of the year. And it's like, don't you feel any pull or compunction or desire to be around other people trying to also be better people? Don't you feel that? I want to work together with people who, like me, are sinners and are just trying to be better every day, working at it, really working at it.
Well, apparently they don't, or they'd be there.
I guess. Well, maybe they don't realize they're a sinner like me.
Well, that's possible. I actually called Colleen King a C&E Christian to her face, and she said, "What? I said, you're a Christmas and Easter Christian. It's the only time I see you. She went, yeah, that's accurate. Okay.
Yeah, wow.
And Cassie was standing there, and I don't know if they talked about it later, but I thought,
They might have talked about it prior.
that's true.
Cassie
Yeah.
might agree with you.
Yeah. So anyway. Okay.
I always thought that would be terribly embarrassing to do
hmm
because
Well,
people
you-
have to notice that that's the only time you show up. That would be humiliating, embarrassing.
The vast majority of people I see like that, Stuart, I don't even know their names.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean,
But
I
I
don't even know who
remember
they are.
when I was
come
When
the
I-
Sunday before, the Sunday after, don't show up on that Sunday.
I remember when I was young, we only went at Easter. And when we went, and then I went to Sunday school at Easter, then I decided, well, I don't have to go back until next Easter, because the kids were, pretty, no one was really very friendly when I did go. So no, it didn't bother me at all. I mean, I didn't really start going to church regularly until Bud and I decided to find a church after we were married. So it didn't bother me. I didn't feel embarrassed. I didn't like it because you had to wear crinoline dresses that itched you like crazy when you went to church. So I could have done away with that forever.
So if I meditate every day and I pray for people and I go work for Habitat for Humanity and I stand up for social causes, but I never show up at church, does that not make me a Christian?
I think so, but the Bible
Yes.
says you grow your faith by being with other like-minded people. So I know I benefit by coming and
I
learning from
be
you
with
guys.
other like-minded people, we just might not show up at the little white church, right?
Right. But don't you think you learn a lot from being around other Christians?
Well, maybe I am around other Christians is my point.
Yeah,
So
Yeah.
it's not Sunday morning at 11 o'clock.
trappings of, you have to wear a bow tie and dress up and do this and that. And if you don't do that, you're not Christian. And I think that's maybe not correct.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's, that article, Susan, that you sent us, and reading that, I think most folks, they view their relationship with God as being a pretty moral kind of process.
Yeah.
And if the organization that you're with is not behaving with that integrity to,
Yeah, I was really amazed that
um,
throughout the article that it wasn't that they didn't believe in God. I think
right, that was the
it
issue.
was the people that they experienced in the name of that were Christians that didn't act like Christians. And earlier on in Barclay's book, he makes a comment that the problem is, that people have to see that you're a Christian by what you do, and that you seem like you're following what Jesus would do. And when you're not like that, then that's like bad PR for Christ,
Yeah.
and you're a representative. You're a representative of Christ to anyone who is questioning, the church or whatever. So, but these people didn't seem to be questioning that. They seemed to believe in God. They just didn't believe what the religious people they met, how they acted. And
Yeah,
what
my
they did.
sister has a very, very strong faith, and she and I will frequently talk about religion. But the last time she was in a church was back in probably close to 35 years ago. And our dad spent 3 months in the hospital, so she was not at church very often for that 3-month period. And when she went back, there was no expression of concern about what had been wrong. Nobody had reached out to her in that 3-month absence. What she got was, "Oh, where have you been?"
Mhm.
And she just turned around, walked out, and hadn't been in a church since.
Right.
And wishes very much that she lived closer to Bonaire, because she has been to Bonaire some, but it's a bit of a trip for her.
Well, and that's, churches, I think it's a constant thing we have to monitor.
Yeah.
As a church, what we do, is it to benefit ourselves, or is it to further God's love in the world?
Both.
And I think, at minimum, you got to make sure there's a balance there.
Yeah.
Well, when I was at Bethany, ladies didn't wear pants. When I came to Bonaire in November of 97, I'm like, woo, pants it is.
And in 2020, it's questionable.
Right.
Yeah, I'm not going to ask anybody to stand up here. Okay, moving on to the next section. Would somebody read Matthew 10, verses 26 through 31?
I'll do it.
Okay.
Do not fear them, for there is nothing which is covered which shall not be unveiled, and there is nothing hidden which shall not be known. What I tell you in the darkness, speak in the light. What you hear whispered in your ear, proclaim on the housetops. Do not fear those who can kill the body, but who cannot kill the soul. Rather fear him who is able to destroy both soul and body in Gehenna. Are 2 sparrows not sold for a penny, and not one of them shall light on the ground without your Father's knowledge? The hairs of your head are all numbered. So then do not be afraid. You are of more value than many sparrows.
Okay, there's a lot here. There are 3, what?
Bud's showing us the numbers of hairs on his head, an easy count.
It might not be worth much.
But you make up for it.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, there's 1 in every group. There are 3 times in this short passage that Jesus bids his disciples to not be afraid. So the first commandment is in verses 26 and 27. And they are not to be afraid, because there is nothing covered that will not be unveiled, and nothing hidden which will not be known. And my other source made the point that that we look at this now more in an eschatological, the end times type of thing, rather than just right this minute. The truth will triumph. And they are not to be afraid to speak with boldness. It's one thing to be quietly Christian. It's something else to go out there and talk about it. And I have struggled with that many times. And then he talks about, and I'm not sure where he got this out of this passage, but Barclay talks about preachers. And it says in verse 27 lies the true function of the preacher. First, they must listen. They must be in the secret place with Christ, that in the dark hours Christ may speak to them, and that in the loneliness Christ may whisper in their ear. No one can speak for Christ who has not heard Christ speak. No one can proclaim the truth who has not listened to the truth, for we cannot pass on that which we do not know.
I didn't realize until I was an adult that all preachers weren't called by Christ. I used to hear when I was a kid, well, I got the call from Christ at, and then fill in the blank, youth camp or whatever, when I was dying in a hospital bed or whatever. I didn't know until I was an adult that some people just choose to be preachers, but they never had a call to be one.
Yeah, I had one of those preachers.
Who wasn't called?
Yeah, I don't think he was called. He married me to first husband, so I wasn't in town a lot because we had moved to Blacksburg, but I got the feeling he was in it for the money. I grew up in a church that may actually have been a little bigger than Bonaire Baptist.
Wow.
Yeah. So
Well, I'm not saying you have to be called to be a good, effective preacher. I'm just saying, I thought
Yeah.
when I was younger, everybody was.
right, I had the same experience,
Yeah.
but I could even at the time, I could kind of tell there was something missing. Something was missing.
Did you also, when you're growing up, at least I could immediately tell with a teacher, even when I was like in first grade, I could tell which teachers loved their job and which
Yeah.
teachers were teachers because it was a job.
Yes.
Yeah, I knew a woman that chose to get a degree in education because it was easier than anything else in the catalog. And I thought, oh, I pity her poor students that she's going to have.
Yeah. When I was at Longwood, we didn't student teach until our senior year. And it was amazing to me the number of people that had their first experience and came back in tears because they hated kids. They loved history, but they hated kids. And I'm like, the first thing teaching schools ought to teach is you got to like kids. Forget history.
Yeah, they'd be putting them in the classroom their freshman year.
And they do now. Longwood does now. In the 80s, they started doing that so they could weed out people that didn't like kids.
Right.
Yeah, but
That was one of my first questions when I hired teachers at Midlothian High School. What have you done to show me that you like kids? And if they couldn't tell me in high school and college they had done anything where they worked with kids, they didn't get my vote at Midlothian. I wanted to know if they like kids, not history.
But I can also remember in high school when we would get student teachers, there were certain groups of students that took great pleasure in making it as challenging as possible. And we turned one prospective teacher into a car salesman.
Wow.
I shouldn't say we because I was little Miss Goody Two Shoes. I was going to be nice regardless. But when we heard that, there were guys, especially walking around going, "Yeah, we did it." Substitute teachers, student teachers, we're not going to give you a good time here.
I agree with Claire. I remember teachers that used to hug me and pat me on the back and say nice things to me in elementary school. And then there was a teacher one particular year in elementary school, never touched me, never hugged me, never patted me on the hand, never anything, not a pat on the back, nothing, just a job. Didn't really care for kids too much. And you can tell.
When I was a senior in high school, my father sat me down the table and basically said, I'll pay to educate you to be a teacher, a nurse, or a secretary.
Yep.
Well,
I
knew
got the exact same speech.
My mother got the same speech too, and she hated all three.
Well, I knew I'd kill the kids. I'd vomit on the patients. So that left business school.
Yeah.
Yeah, my parents were very progressive for their time. I was told I could do anything I wanted to do.
Wow. I told
Wow.
mine that from the time they were little bitty. I want you to be happy.
Well, I don't remember, so much I want you to be happy, but it was a case of you're smart. You can do anything you want. So choose wisely.
I told my kids there were jobs and a hat on a piece of paper. The more educated people pick first and the people with less education pick last. You get to pick from the jobs that are left over. If you don't want to pick from what's left in the hat, get an education.
I like that.
Well, Jason listened to me, Daniel not so much, and he's now back in school picking his career because he picked from what was left in the hat, and it's okay, but it doesn't pay. He could have done it straight out of high school. He does home radon testing. He could have done that straight out of high school, not after 5 years at Longwood. So he's back in school.
What's he studying now?
Accounting, same as Kyle Clark.
If he needs help, you've got my number.
Yeah. Oh, he's doing well. I mean, he's in his 30s. He's got 2 kids and a wife and a mortgage, and yep. He asked me if I would pay for the first class. I cried, I laughed so hard. Hell no.
People are just not ready. That doesn't mean they're stupid or anything else. It's not ready. I was
Correct.
ready to go to college. Really, I was failing out, but after coming out of the service and having a few bumps in the road, I decided that I wanted to learn a few things. And so now I have 2 master's degrees and I might know a little bit of something, but you're just not ready at a certain time. And maybe
It's a process.
the radon teaches him something that will make him be some kind of hotshot scientist before it's all over. Who knows?
I tell people, I tell people I'm still trying to figure out what I want to be when I grow up.
Oh,
Yeah.
I've heard that before.
Yep.
Well, and it's a process. We're talking about people receiving a call. I think a calling can be a process. It doesn't have to be a one-time event.
Yeah.
That it is something that can evolve over time.
Do we believe Jesus chose the disciples with no talent and he developed their talent? Or did he specifically choose people that he knew already had an underlying talent? I wonder.
I think it probably was a combination of all of that. I think the disciples represent the spectrum of humanity, so to speak.
And I think when you hear about God calling people in the Bible, he's always calling the least, the person you would least expect, or who would say, why me? What, Moses? What do you want me to public speak? I think that it's just meaning that God can call the smallest of us. Everyone has the ability to accomplish things.
Rahab
Yeah.
was a prostitute. Yep. In Jericho.
Yeah, look at Jonah. I don't want this. And
Most,
he runs the other way.
most people God called didn't want it, and
Yeah.
actively said that, not me. What do you want me for?
Right, and that's this. Well, anyhow, that's a different point. Yeah. So,
Thanks, Sarah.
Okay. And back to when he talks about the preachers. Second, preachers must speak what they have heard from Christ, and they must speak even if their speaking is to gain them the hatred of others, and even if by speaking they take their lives in their own hands. Who do we know, or do you know anybody, whether personally or from history, preachers who took their lives in their own hands?
Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Germany, 1945.
yeah, a number, during the course of the Civil War, some in other parts of the world. I don't think so much here in this country.
Martin
some
Luther
who-
King Jr.
Yeah, Martin Luther King Jr. I was getting ready to say, except for those speaking out at different times about social justice, racial issues, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I had a conversation with Cindy many, many years ago when I was, developing my personal theology, and I found out that Cindy's theology was real close to where I was headed. And I asked her, I said, well, but you don't preach this from the pulpit. And she said, I want to keep my job. And when you look at our congregation and the wide range of beliefs, and how she can preach a sermon to Tim Baden and to me, I'm so impressed with her ability to keep us all together.
And the funny thing is, you and Tim and Frank Clark all grew up Baptist, didn't you?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they grew up very strict Southern Baptist. Yeah.
Yeah. I did too. But
Yeah.
I questioned, and Tim Baden actually said to me, or maybe it was Kathy, I don't want to think about it. I want to be told what to think, and I'll think it and go on. And I just
and some people are just comfortable with that.
right. you know, and if that's where your comfort level is, that's fine.
Yeah,
But
I agree.
my dad taught me to question everything, and
Me too.
that lesson stuck. So
Yep.
here I sit.
Yep.
Doesn't
I
it come
question
down to
everything.
how we treat each other, you know, as Christians?
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, that's what it comes down to. So.
Yeah. Okay. Those who bear Christian witness are the men and women who know no fear, because they know the judgment of eternity will correct the judgments of time. So if we are worried about what other people think, that could have a bad influence or a negative impact on what we might be willing to say or to do. Because we know in the end, when it's important, God's judgment is really the only one that matters.
But there are always times we all hold our tongues in an environment where it's just not going to be productive to share it.
Exactly, yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm getting better at it.
me too. I'm just getting better at judging the times where it's just not worth it to waste your time.
The battles.
Yeah, exactly. Good point, Susan. Pick your battles.
Yeah. The second commandment in this passage is in verse 28. To put it very simply, what Jesus is saying is that no punishment that others can lay on us can compare with the ultimate fate of one who has been guilty of infidelity and disobedience to God. Humans can kill our physical bodies, but not our souls.
But isn't it
Yes.
warning us about those who can destroy both body and soul?
Well, yeah, that gets into the next section, yeah.
Oh, sorry.
So what's an example of someone who can destroy your soul?
would that be someone who causes you to fall away from Christ?
Like pulls you into the occult or alcohol or drugs or something they know will cause you to focus on that thing and not God.
Well, I think, and I agree with you, Kitten. And I think there also are people who, for whether it's to be power, control, whatever, are so emotionally manipulative and abusive of another person or other people that, you know, I have just seen a number of women in particular in my career whose souls really have been destroyed by people. You know, sometimes it's a succession of people, sometimes it's a one relationship that's done it, but whose souls have just been virtually destroyed.
And that's why we need to help the ladies we help in the women's shelters that both our CWFs help, because they have the strength to get out and we need to help them.
And it's a process to make that happen.
Well, and we see on TV all the time where the men hunt them down and still kill them.
Some do. Some do.
Yeah.
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 It's a huge risk.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah, and I've heard somewhere that on average, I think, women leave 7 times before they stay out of it.
Right. Yep.
So maybe if we help them, it won't take so many tries.
Right.
I think sometimes it's also, I think about, you know, when you're young and when you get in with a group of kids, you know, and you could start out with, oh, let's go toilet paper the so-and-so's trees, okay? But then the next time it turns in, well, let's go down to the railroad track and steal rails so that we can sell them. And then it becomes something else and it builds, you know, with a group of people. And some of the people will fall away, but some of them will cling to it. You know, it's just like gangs, you know, that gangs know that, you know, a lot of times they'll support each other, you know, and look what people do. Even we hear about in fraternities and the hazing that goes on before you're accepted into the group, you know, and what VCU is going through right now with the one young man who was killed
Mhm.
through that. So it's very easy to slowly be with people who, or be with a group that you feed off of each other and think that because you're a group, this is success, this is acceptable because it's acceptable to the group.
That seems to be, in my mind, where we are as a society.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the need for always a greater adrenaline rush, make it more of a rush, make it more shocking, more this, more that, more whatever. I don't understand the concept of bungee jumping, but there are places here that you can go bungee jumping. I'm thinking, why?
I'm with you.
Everything Evil Knievel ever chose to do, I'm just shaking my head. Why?
Yeah.
Yeah, especially after, the accidents he had were
Broke almost every bone in his body multiple times.
right. But I do think I'm with you, Bud. I'm really concerned about our society, and how it's either my way or it's no way. The loss of the art of compromise, because usually in the middle there's something for everybody. And
Yeah.
looking at the greater good, I think we really have lost sight of the greater good in the last few years.
Well, we're all
Yeah, but it's been bad before. Go back and read history. Did you see the movie Lincoln?
Mhm.
All the back night deals he was making to get the Emancipation Proclamation passed. He went to see one guy in the middle of the night and promised him that he could be the Postmaster General, I think, of Ohio. If he would just vote for the Emancipation Proclamation, I'll give you a permanent job for the rest of your life. It's been really bad like this through history before, many, many times.
But I think also with technology now, you have the ability to say hateful things and then hide behind a screen. And
I agree.
that has fueled this. It's pouring gasoline on a fire.
I agree. But when the telephone became a thing, people used to call, we used to go to girl parties and you'd call other girls and say hurtful and mean things. You're not going to the dance and you're fat and you're ugly. And I'm like, this is what we do for fun? No. The telephone was horrible in the 60s. People would call other people and say horrible things. People have committed suicide because of things said to them over the phone.
One of my bosses said a long time ago, just keep your head down till the shooting stops.
It doesn't, yeah, every generation just has a new thing, but it's happened before, many, many times.
Okay.
I find it amazing and shocking at how much hatred that our entire country seems to be outpouring. I just never thought America stood for something as hatred as we're seeing. I just find it shocking.
There have always been hate groups, always will be.
But it's different. I have a friend who's in Australia and we talk about, this, and it's really, other countries don't seem to be as polarized as we are.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. And the hatred that we grew up with was systemic, in terms of the way we treated Blacks.
Mhm.
I wasn't aware that it was hateful, but now I look back on it and I can see where the Blacks would have grown up feeling hated.
Well, at the end of the Vietnam War, there was an anti-Asian wave of hate because they were all immigrating over here.
Yeah. Okay, back to the lesson. This section, and I'm on page 448, he talks about that there's still left in the Christian life a place for what we might call holy fear. I think, this is another place where I see a pendulum swinging that a lot of us grew up. I didn't experience this directly, but I've known several people that have said they grew up with the hellfire and damnation. They were scared into being saved. You're a horrible, horrible person. You've got to be a Christian, so you've got a chance to go to heaven because you're just evil. Fear God. God's going to smite you. And I think the pendulum's gone the other way. God is love. Everything's okay. And I think maybe we ought to be somewhere in the middle to acknowledge that God is love, but also to acknowledge that God is holy. And because there's kind of a tension between those two things.
Love.
And that you have a responsibility. Yeah, God is love, but you've got a responsibility.
I never heard about the God of love until I was an adult and started going to his church. When I was a kid, God was full of hate, meanness, vengeful, punishing, smiting, smoting.
Yep.
Right.
I never heard about God of love until I was an adult.
And it's funny because for me, starting out at BACC, when I moved here and now I'm going to these churches and the ministers up there screaming that, we're all evil and horrible and you're, going to hell and all this stuff. And I'm going, where is this coming from?
The Old Testament.
Well, only parts of the Old Testament.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're picking and choosing,
Yeah.
because when you're preaching hellfire and damnation, you have a lot of power. When you're in that pulpit and you're using God to tell everybody you are, lower than dirt, you have a lot of power and control. And
I
you-
felt that as a child, Kathy. I
and you
did.
are using it
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
for your own benefit.
I felt that as a child.
I agree with you, Kitten. That was what I was taught.
Claire, I'm glad you started at BACC, so you got off on the right foot.
And that's why it's hard for me, because I go to these churches and I sit and I listen, and instead of making me cowed, it makes me angry. And I just want to stand up and say, where are you getting this? I've read the New Testament many times, and Jesus is love. And we need to start with that and build up. Yes, there's major responsibility on our part. It's not just something that's given, well, it is given freely, but there's still responsibility. But this, I had one where he's like, you don't think you're a sinner? You don't think this? Well, let me prove to you. On the way here, it said speed limit. It didn't say speed suggestion. It said speed limit, and you broke it. You've sinned. And he's going on. And I was like, I got to go. I got to go.
Wow.
And there are some people, our group here this morning, we're all pretty deep thinkers about life and that kind of stuff. There are folks that do need those firm, clear limits.
Yep.
They need that. But I do think it can be done in a way that doesn't destroy their soul.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah,
from a practical standpoint, if churches are concerned about growing and membership and everything else. Well, if I have limited time because my life is so busy, which everyone's is, am I going to take that precious Sunday and go and sit and listen to someone who tells me that I'm horrible repeatedly?
Nope.
No. So I don't get it.
The other side of fear is guilt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, true. Yep.
And some people just want religion to be easy. If I have a minister that's going to say, don't do the 10 Commandments and you're fine, or something that makes it simple and easy. Some people just want it to be simple and easy. I follow these rules and I'm okay. I'm a good Christian. That's easy. You don't have to think. You don't have to I mean, we all like to read a passage and think about it and tease it apart. Many people could care less about that.
Yeah.
Well, Kitten and Bernie McDonald's in our class, and he grew up Catholic, and he has frequently said that Catholicism is easy.
Yeah.
They tell you exactly, step 1, step 2, step 3, and so forth. You do this and you're good.
Yeah, well, we had a huge discussion in our class several years ago that Martin Luther really didn't do us any favors. He said, it's not on the priest. You think for yourself. You read the Bible and you're responsible for your own salvation. The Catholic Church makes the priest responsible for your salvation. And that's easy. I'm not responsible. I just go and do my confession and he prays for me and the priest squares it up with God for me. Martin Luther said, oh no, you read that Bible, you interpret it yourself. You're responsible for yourself. You answer directly to God. That's a huge responsibility.
Yeah.
It's easier to be Catholic, way easier.
Well, that's because if you don't do certain things, you're not Catholic anymore.
I didn't realize that, really?
Well, if you get a divorce, it used to be, if you have an abortion, if you did birth control, I mean, think of Catholic, I don't know today, but there were things that eliminated you from getting communion. So, when you have tough rules, hard rules set by men, about what you can do and can't do and still be a part of the church, then you either are a good Catholic or not a Catholic.
When my mother in 1958 married my dad, a Methodist, it was made clear to her. She didn't receive a letter, but it was made clear to her that she was no longer welcome in the church because she married outside the church. 1958.
I'm surprised that
Isn't Christianity wonderful?
Yeah, isn't it loving, kind, inclusive? Yeah.
But Kitten, I had a friend who's and it would have been roughly the same time. Her mother had died and her father was a Presbyterian. They were Presbyterians. He married a Catholic and he converted to Catholicism and promised that any children that they would have would be raised as Catholics. I'm surprised. Was your mother not pressured to do that with your dad?
Oh, my dad would have never gone for that. They may have had that discussion. The Abernathy family has been Methodist for hundreds of years. Yeah, he wouldn't have bitten at that at all. They were actually married, I found out, in the Methodist church. I found a certificate last summer when I cleaned out my dad's stuff. I never knew that. I thought they were just married by a justice of the peace. They were married in a Methodist church on the Coast Guard base up at in Boston. I'm shocked that my mother did that.
I'm impressed.
Yeah.
I was raised Southern Baptist, and we had a couple that he was a member of the church, Southern Baptist, and he married a Catholic lady. And she would come with him to church, but she sat on one of the back pews and did not participate at all. She was physically in the church, but that was it. She didn't do anything else as far as our services or anything like that. And so for all of us kids, it was hey, let's watch her and see if she shuts her eyes, see if she prays at all. But she showed up. But I found out as I got a little older and all, they went to a Catholic service on Saturday night, and he would go with her. I always found it, like I said, she was there. Whether anything ever became of it or not, I don't know, because we moved. But she was willing to compromise.
Okay. Well, my mother was engaged before she married my dad. She actually was engaged twice, and one of them was a Catholic. And she would go to church with him, and then she'd invite him to come with her. And he always came up with excuses. And after several months, it dawned on her. She said, "Are you ever going to come to church with me?" And he said, "No, I'm not allowed." And she handed him his ring back. He said, when we get married, you're going to have to be a Catholic. And she went, "Oh, no, I'm not." That was the end of that engagement.
Well, it's as we're talking about this, the Disciples of Christ, as a denomination, has long had ongoing conversations with the Catholic Church. Just in terms of, I guess it's more like, sharing a faith journey kind of thing. But, the disciples have done a lot of work through the years, provided a lot of leadership in ecumenical efforts, not just in the United States, but around the world.
I don't have anything against the Catholic Church. I think over 2,000 years, they've done a lot to teach people about the Bible with very simplistic, songs and little manipulative things, and done a lot to simplify the Bible for people who were illiterate.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they've done a lot to spread Christianity around the world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so going back to the idea of God being holy, any other comments about that? We're supposed to, we've talked about this in our class, that we're supposed to fear God, but not be, it's not saying we're supposed to be afraid of God, more that we hold God in awe, to acknowledge that holiness. Because I think in today's world, I don't see a lot of that. We think we're so scientifically and technologically advanced that, and I'm guilty of this. I don't stop to think about the holiness of God very often, in all honesty.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think it also comes down to respect. And I think that respect is something that we're not experiencing, interpersonally, and therefore that translates in our not perhaps really worshiping as we should, the holiness.
Yeah, I remember the idea that you dressed up on Sunday because that showed respect when you went to church, being dressed up. And the same thing in, when you go to visit somebody, you wear your good clothes, that the way you look, the way you attire yourself is an indication of respect. And I'm certainly not wanting to go back to the itchy crinolines because, but I admit to feeling unsettled when I see some of the really extremely casual attire that I see at church sometimes. Because I do see it as a lack of respect.
I agree, Sarah.
I think when I, crap.
All right.
Okay. What's happening, Susan?
Oh, my computer is telling me that it wants to update.
Yeah, tell it to be patient.
And now I'm trying to find where everybody is.
Okay. I'm about to run out of time, so let me see if I can get through this one section here. And the third commandment in this section is not to fear, and it's based on the certainty of the detailed care of God. And this is where they talk about the sparrows. Barclay even goes into where you could buy 5 sparrows for the price of 4 because they just weren't worth anything. But God knew every time they landed. We've seen it translated as when a sparrow falls to earth. And Barclay said it's not that the sparrow is dying, it's every time the sparrow lands. God is aware. And if God's aware of every time the little worthless sparrow lands, how much more so is he aware of us and what we are doing and what's important to us?
And I think earlier when you were talking about holiness, and when I think back at the times when I felt closest to that, to being in awe, it has always been when I was young and laying in the grass and looking up at the night sky, or when I was out in nature and
Yes.
seeing things, or in the garden and seeing it's amazing. It's just awe-inspiring to
Yes.
littlest thing. And I rarely have gotten that same honest in any kind of religious ceremony. It's always been with being with nature.
Yeah.
That
Being with creation. So I'm going to read one sentence and then we have to go. God's love for us is seen not only in the omnipotence of creation and the great events of history, but it is also seen in the day-to-day nourishment of our bodies. So it's the big and it's the little bitty details. And God is in all of it. And Cindy's starting church right now, so I'm going to say goodbye. Glad you were here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
The next person starts on the bottom of page 451.